I'm Jonathan Watt with Atara Group International. We hope you're enjoying our content, and if you are, and also want to support this ministry, please press the like button and subscribe to our channel. We're talking today about a well-known name in Christian history from approximately 6 centuries ago, Joan of Arc, who is a story of faith and politics and also gender. It takes place and focuses on a trial that took place in the year 1431. In that year, a teenage peasant girl from Domremy, a small village in northeastern France, faced one of the most infamous trials in church history. Joan of Arc, who had inspired the French army to lift the Siege of Orléans and help turn the tide of the 100 Years' War, was captured by the Burgundians and handed over to the English. And her trial, conducted under the auspices of a church court, was as much about political control and gender as it was about theology and orthodoxy. Joan of Arc's story illustrates the precarious position of women who claim spiritual authority and political authority in medieval Europe, and the ways church courts could be co-opted for political purposes. It also highlights the extraordinary impact of faith, charisma, and also vision in a society that was dominated by a very hierarchical power structure. Early life and divine calling of Joan of Arc are interesting. She's born around the year 1412 to Jacques and Isabelle d'Arc, peasants in Domremy, during a period of intense conflict between the nations of France and England. And the 100 Years' War, as it's come to be known as, rages between the year 1337 and 1453, literally a little bit longer than a century, and it had created chaos, devastation, especially across northern France, with towns being occupied, villages being raided, and frankly, the legitimacy of leadership being contested in many places in many ways. So from an early age, Joan claimed to receive visions from saints. And according to her own accounts, these saints instructed her to help drive the English from French lands and ensure the coronation of Charles VII as the next king of France. Now, naturally, her claims were extraordinary, particularly because she was a teenage peasant girl in a society that relegated women generally to the domestic sphere. Yet her visions, combined with her reputation for piety and moral integrity, drew attention in her village and surrounding regions. Now, initially, local officials were skeptical, but her steadfastness and the clarity of purpose that she showed earned her a degree of credibility. And it also started to get the attention of those in power. So Joan's entry into the national stage was facilitated by both spiritual and political circumstances. France was divided, with English forces occupying significant portions of territory, and this legitimacy of Charles VII, who was for the time the Dauphin, still contested. And French morale was at a low point, and leadership struggled to unify the kingdom against foreign occupation. So Joan convinced local military officials and eventually Charles VII himself to grant her an audience. And her arguments were compelling. She spoke with certainty. She claimed God had chosen her for a mission and insisted that success was dependent on divine guidance. And while extraordinary in terms of content, what made her persuasive was her unshakable conviction and her personal integrity. She displayed no desire for personal gain and apparently none for political power either. Very unusual, given all the circumstances. Now, Charles VII faced a difficult decision. Should he trust a peasant girl who's claiming divine guidance in matters of warfare? But the times were desperate. Desperate circumstances, combined with Joan's courage and her knowledge of military routes and strategy, convinced him to allow her to accompany a relief army to Orléans in the year 1429. And her presence alone inspired the French troops, restored some morale, and instilled a sense of divine purpose towards this military campaign. Now, on the battlefield itself, she proved herself. At Orléans, Joan quickly demonstrated her influence. She did not claim command in the traditional sense, but acted as a moral and spiritual leader, encouraging troops, leading prayer, and inspiring soldiers to take risks against the English fortifications. Now, reports suggest that she carried a banner rather than a weapon, symbolizing her spiritual authority, yet still her presence would galvanize the army into action. And the Siege of Orléans was lifted in a matter of weeks, a remarkable turnaround that many contemporaries attributed to the divine favor mediated through Joan. So her success continued as she guided Charles VII to his coronation at Rheims, a symbolic event that signified his legitimacy as king. And Joan's involvement was pivotal. She convinced hesitant leaders to act decisively. She organized troops. She maintained the loyalty and the morale of the soldiers. For many years, she was not only a religious figure, but also a strategic force capable of influencing political outcomes. And her ability to be heard by men in position of power was unprecedented and was also deeply unsettling to both the Allies as well as the enemies from France's point of view. So here's what happened. There was a capture, and there would come to be a political trial. Joan's rising influence had made her a target. And in May of 1430, she was captured by Burgundian forces. Now, these were a French faction that was allied with England. And they handed her over to the English, who saw her as a threat to their claims on France. And they arranged an ecclesiastical trial under Bishop Pierre Cauchon, a pro-English cleric who was himself determined to undermine her moral and spiritual authority and thus delegitimize Charles VII's coronation. So while Joan was presented at a church trial for heresy, the proceedings were heavily manipulated to serve English political objectives. So she faced accusations of heresy such as blasphemy and the heresy of cross-dressing, a charge that struck at both theological norms but also gender expectations. And the cross-dressing accusation was particularly significant at this time because medieval European norms strictly regulated women's clothing, and so Joan's male military attire was seen as evidence of defiance against both church and against societal order. And you can sort of predict what's going to come here. Joan's gender played a central role in her own prosecution. Teenage peasant girl speaking to kings, advising generals, inspiring troops, directly challenged patriarchal norms of all kinds. And during the trial, she insisted she had worn male clothing for practical reasons like safety in captivity and the realities of battlefield necessity, not as an act of defiance. And her insistence on practical reasoning combined with spiritual claims frustrated the court and highlighted the threat her agency posed to the established hierarchies of the day. Now, despite these pressures, all allied against her, Joan defended herself with remarkable intelligence and composure. She quoted the scriptures, she articulated the morality of her visions, and she refused to admit guilt for acts she considered divinely sanctioned. The court, however, restricted her access to legal counsel, coerced her into signing a recantation under duress, and manipulated proceedings to ensure a conviction. Again, you can see what's coming just around the corner. Joan was ultimately convicted of heresy, and she was burned at the stake on May 30th, 1431, at the age of 19. Her death was intended to serve as a warning to others who might challenge ecclesiastical and political authority, and yet her courage and unwavering faith transformed her into a symbol of spiritual and also national resistance. Now, a posthumous retrial in 1455 and 56, which was authorized by Charles VII in France, nullified the original conviction, recognizing the trial as politically motivated and confirming Joan's legal innocence. Centuries later, she was even canonized, though not until 1920, illustrating how her life and martyrdom had endured religious and cultural significance for a very, very long time. So, what are the lessons we can take away from the story of Joan of Arc and her trial? It underscores, I would say, several enduring themes in church history. One of them is to be aware of the church and state interplay. Her trial shows how ecclesiastical authority can easily be manipulated to get political objectives. Joan's conviction was really less about theology and more about maintaining control over the French crown. Number two, there were gender and religious authority issues here. Joan's life highlights the risks women often face when claiming any kind of spiritual or political authority in a male-dominated society. And her courage challenged deeply entrenched norms, then and in some ways today too. Thirdly, her faith and leadership, it's an interesting study. Joan's rise demonstrates how conviction, charisma, and a sense of divine mission can indeed inspire others and affect political and military outcomes in a positive way. Fourthly, martyrdom and memory. Joan's execution created a powerful legacy that shaped French national identity and religious memory and the understanding of female leadership in, well, even in spiritual matters. So let's continue the conversation. Joan's story invites reflections on the intersection of faith, politics, and gender. How do religious institutions navigate political influence? How do societies respond when individuals challenge established hierarchies? We encourage you to share your reflections on this, and please do suggest future topics in the comments section below, because your input helps us uncover the hidden stories and perhaps overlooked figures that have shaped Christian history in any of a number of different ways. Tara Group International is about supporting leaders and organizations, churches, nonprofits, community organizations of any kind that are seeking guidance in leadership or program development, event planning. We offer services that are tailored support for your group. And these include leadership and staff training, for example, help with grant writing, providing of keynote speaking, for providing of retreat or conference leadership, equipping organizations to align their vision with practical action and expand their impact on the communities that we serve.